Story number 1.
Nash always thought delivering pizzas was an easy way to make money while finishing school. He worked for a Domino's on the edge of town, mostly quiet neighborhoods with the occasional sketchy area, but nothing he couldn't handle. That was until the night of September 14th. It was a rainy Friday, the kind where the streets seemed deserted, and the only people calling in for food were those who didn't want to step outside. Around 9:15 p.m., the store phone rang, and Nash noticed the address was unfamiliar, off Pine Hollow Road, near the old mill everyone said was haunted. He didn't believe in any of that, but something about the order felt strange. A single pepperoni pizza, cash payment, and a phone number that didn't match any account in the system. Nash grabbed the order, zipped up his jacket, and headed out. The rain came down in sheets, his wipers barely keeping up. As he turned onto Pine Hollow Road, the familiar streetlights became fewer and farther between. By the time he reached the address, it was pitch black, except for the dim headlights of his car. The house stood at the very end of a gravel driveway, 2 stories tall but completely dark. He parked by the front steps and grabbed the pizza, shivering as he stepped into the cold rain. He rang the doorbell. Nothing. Knocked. Still nothing. Just as he was about to turn back, the door creaked open a few inches. Nash called out, "Domino's," but no one answered. He could see just a sliver of the hallway inside, dusty floorboards and faded wallpaper peeling from the walls. Something told him to leave, but policy said to wait at least 5 minutes. He knocked again, louder this time, when suddenly a voice, raspy and low, came from within. "Come in. Leave it on the kitchen table." Nash hesitated, every instinct screaming to walk away, but the storm was getting worse and the idea of driving back with a paid pizza wasn't appealing. He stepped inside, calling out again, but no one came to meet him. The smell hit him first, old wood, mold, and something else, metallic and sharp. He moved through the hallway, his shoes creaking on the boards beneath him. The kitchen was straight ahead, just as the voice had said. A table sat in the middle of the room with an envelope on top, presumably payment. He set the pizza down and grabbed the envelope. That's when he heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from upstairs. He froze, listening closely. It grew louder, slow steps dragging across the floor above him. Nash took a step back when a loud thump came from the second floor, followed by what sounded like a low moan. He bolted for the front door, but it slammed shut just as he reached for the handle. Panic surged through his chest as he twisted and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. He ran back into the hallway, pulling out his phone, but there was no signal. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving down the staircase. His breath quickened as he pressed himself into a corner of the hallway. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs, tall and unnaturally thin. The thing stepped into the faint light. Gray skin stretched over sharp bones, sunken eyes staring right at him, and a grin that didn't seem human. Nash couldn't move, frozen in terror as it whispered, "Stay, just a little longer." He forced himself to break free, rushing to the back door in the kitchen, but it too was locked. The windows were boarded up from the inside. The figure crept closer, slow but steady. Desperate, Nash grabbed a rusty chair and smashed it against the window, shards of glass breaking free. He forced himself through, cutting his arm as he tumbled outside into the rain. Sprinting back to his car, he jumped in, locking the doors and turning the key with shaking hands. As the engine roared to life, he looked back at the house. The front door was wide open, and the figure stood there, watching him. Nash didn't wait to see anything else. He sped down the gravel driveway, his tires skidding in the mud, not stopping until he reached the well-lit main road. Back at Domino's, Nash reported what happened. But when the manager sent the police to check it out, they found the house completely abandoned. No signs of anyone living there for years. The strangest part? The order hadn't come from the Domino's system. It didn't even register as a call. The phone number was disconnected, and the address hadn't been occupied since a family disappeared inside it 5 years ago. Nash never took another delivery on Pine Hollow Road. Even now, sometimes when the store phone rings late at night and there's only static on the other end, he feels the same chill from that night, as if something is still waiting, hungry for another visitor.
Story number 2.
Jenna worked the closing shift at a Domino's located just outside a small industrial town. She liked the quiet late-night deliveries, fewer customers, and bigger tips. But there was one neighborhood everyone tried to avoid, an old set of back roads lined with trailer homes and abandoned lots. Her manager told her not to worry when an order came through for that area one Thursday night, around 11:30 p.m. Large cheese pizza, 2-liter Coke, cash on delivery. She grabbed the order and drove out, the night unusually silent. As she made her way down a road named Millstone Lane, she realized her GPS wasn't working properly. The location kept shifting further into the woods behind the trailers. She drove past the last house with lights on and continued deeper into the trees where the road narrowed, potholes jarring her car. Finally, she reached a clearing where a small, rotting trailer sat alone. The front light flickered weakly, barely illuminating a rusted swing set beside it. Jenna parked and left her headlights on. She didn't want to spend a second longer than necessary. As she approached, the door creaked open a few inches before she could knock. A child's voice, high-pitched and monotone, called out, "Come in." Jenna immediately felt uneasy. She knocked, louder. "Domino's," she called, but the voice simply repeated, "Come in, come in." She was about to turn and leave when she noticed movement near the swing set. Her headlights lit up a figure slowly swaying. It was a boy, maybe 8 years old, dressed in tattered clothes. She called to him, asking if his parents were home, but he didn't respond, just kept swinging, his head tilted strangely to the side. Feeling a sense of dread, Jenna stepped back toward her car. That's when she noticed something. The swing was moving, but the boy's legs weren't. He wasn't pushing off the ground. He just hung there, limp, like a puppet dangling from invisible strings. Suddenly, the door of the trailer burst open fully. Inside was total darkness, except for a faint glimmer reflecting off something metallic. Dozens of sharp hooks hanging from the ceiling. The smell hit her next, a suffocating mix of rot and rust. Behind her, the sound of creaking rope grew louder. She turned, and the boy was no longer swinging. He was standing perfectly still, staring straight at her with black, empty eyes. Jenna didn't wait another second. She dropped the pizza, sprinted back to her car, and fumbled with the keys. As she turned the ignition, she glanced up to see 3 more figures emerging from the woods, thin, broken-looking people, all swaying as they walked toward her. Their eyes reflected red in the headlights like animals. Her car roared to life and she threw it in reverse, tearing out of the clearing, narrowly missing one of the figures. She didn't stop until she got back to the main road. Heart hammering in her chest, she called her manager, who immediately phoned the police. The next day, police investigated the area. The trailer was real, but had been abandoned for over 10 years, condemned after a string of disappearances. They found the pizza box Jenna left behind, untouched, sitting on a rotted floor. No sign of any people, living or dead, just deep scratches along the inside walls and children's drawings scrawled in something dark. Jenna quit Domino's the next morning. She never delivered pizzas again, but sometimes, late at night, her phone still buzzes with blocked numbers. No caller ID, and when she answers, there's only a child's voice whispering, "Come in."
Story number 3.
It started as a regular night shift at the Domino's store on the edge of town. Jake, a part-time delivery driver, had worked there for nearly 6 months and thought he'd seen it all. Late-night orders from party houses, the occasional prank calls, even a few strange customers who always paid in cash and avoided eye contact. But this night, everything changed. It was just past midnight when Jake got a call for a delivery to an old apartment complex about 10 minutes away. The address was on the far side of town, a place known for being run down and mostly empty after dark. The order was simple, a large pepperoni pizza and a soda. Jake grabbed the pizza, checked the slip, and headed out. When he arrived, the building was almost pitch black, with only a single flickering light near the entrance. No cars, no sounds, just the hum of the streetlights. Jake stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his shoes. The elevator was broken, so he climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, where the apartment number was listed. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. Jake called out, "Pizza delivery," but only silence met him. He looked around, feeling the weight of the quiet, but there was no one. Just as he was about to leave, the door creaked open on its own. Inside was a dark, empty room with no furniture, just a faint smell of something metallic in the air. The pizza box sat on the floor by the door, untouched. Confused, Jake stepped back toward the hallway, but then he noticed the door slowly shutting behind him. He spun around to stop it, but his hand hit nothing. There was no door. The wall was solid, like it had never been a door at all. Panic set in as Jake realized he was trapped in a space that shouldn't exist. His phone had no signal. He tried to call the store, but no bars. The flickering light from outside barely penetrated the dark room. Then he heard it, a soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood, coming from the corner of the room. He strained his eyes and saw a shadow moving, slow and deliberate. The shadow took shape, not human but twisted, elongated limbs, a face distorted beyond recognition, eyes black as voids. It whispered Jake's name, a voice like broken glass, promising pain if he didn't stay. Jake bolted for the wall, pounding on it until his knuckles bled, but the shape was behind him, closing in with a cold that seeped to his bones. The last thing Jake heard was the low, guttural growl as the shadow reached out and swallowed him whole. Back at the Domino store, his co-workers noticed he never returned. The manager called the police, but when they searched the apartment complex, the unit was empty. No signs anyone had lived there for years. The pizza order was real, but the customer's name was nowhere in the system. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jake. Some say the building itself traps those who enter after dark. Others say a curse lingers, waiting for the next delivery driver foolish enough to answer the call. But every so often, late at night when the store is quiet, the phone rings. The caller ID shows the old apartment number, and the person on the other end whispers, "Pizza's here."
Story number 4.
It was back in the summer of 2019 when I worked the late shift at a small Domino's in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I was just a delivery driver, mostly working weekends to help cover my college tuition. That night, I was scheduled until close, which meant I'd be wrapping up around 1 a.m. if I was lucky. The orders were steady but not overwhelming, mostly regulars, except for one call that came through around midnight. The order seemed normal: a large pepperoni, cheesy bread, and a bottle of soda. What caught my attention, though, was the address. It wasn't in our usual delivery radius. It was technically outside our zone, a dead-end road surrounded by wooded areas, but the manager said to take it since it wasn't too far. I packed up the order, hopped into my old Corolla, and headed out. The GPS took me onto a narrow, 2-lane road with no streetlights. I had driven out that way before, but never this far down. The trees thickened and the houses grew fewer and further between until they disappeared completely. Finally, the GPS announced I had arrived. There was no house, just a narrow gravel driveway that led into the woods. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, but I could see a dim light deeper into the trees. Thinking it might be a cabin, I drove down the path slowly. It was uneven, and branches scraped the sides of my car. After a minute or so, I reached a clearing where a small, rundown house stood. The porch light flickered like it was on its last breath. I got out of the car, pizza bag in hand, and knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open slightly by itself, and an awful smell hit me, something sour and metallic. I stepped back instinctively. Then I heard movement from inside, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. A man appeared in the doorway, maybe in his mid-40s, wearing a stained white tank top and jeans that were soaked at the knees. His eyes looked hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't say anything, just stared at me. I forced a nervous smile and held out the pizza. "Domino's," I said awkwardly. He nodded slowly, but didn't reach for the food. Instead, he stepped aside and motioned for me to come inside. I hesitated. Everything about this situation felt wrong. I told him I couldn't enter. That company policy said we only delivered to the door. He didn't respond, just kept staring, then muttered something under his breath that I couldn't understand. He disappeared back inside, leaving the door wide open. I was about to just leave the food on the porch when I heard something from behind the house. At first, it sounded like animals rustling in the bushes, but then I distinctly heard a woman's voice crying out for help. It was faint but desperate. My stomach twisted. I called out but got no answer. Then the man reappeared, Now holding something long and metallic, it looked like a crowbar. He glared at me, his expression now sharp and aggressive. I turned and sprinted back to my car, fumbling to unlock the door. I got in, slammed the door shut, and reversed out of that driveway as fast as I could, gravel spitting up behind me. The man charged after me, swinging the crowbar at the car but missing as I sped off down the road. I called my manager immediately and then the police. I told them everything: the strange order, the isolated house, the cries for help. Officers were dispatched, and I had to wait at a nearby gas station for them to arrive. About 30 minutes later, a squad car pulled in, and the officer asked me to follow him back to the property to point out exactly where I had been. When we got there, it was quiet, too quiet. The porch light was off, the door was shut, and no car was in sight. The officers approached cautiously, guns drawn, and knocked on the door. No answer. They forced entry. Inside, they found signs of a violent struggle, broken furniture, blood stains on the floor, and in the back room, a woman tied up, barely conscious. She had been reported missing 3 days earlier from a neighboring town. The man was never found. The police believed he had heard me call for help and fled into the woods before they arrived. The whole area was searched for days, but it was like he had vanished. After that night, I quit my job at Domino's. I couldn't handle delivering to strange houses anymore, not knowing what I might walk into. I still get chills every time I see a gravel driveway surrounded by woods, and I'll never forget the sound of that woman's voice, a faint cry that probably saved her life.
Story number 5.
It was a late Friday night when Jake decided to order Domino's after a long, exhausting week. The kind of night when the streets were empty and the silence outside made every sound inside his small apartment feel amplified. He wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just some hot pizza to comfort him before he crashed for the night. About 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Jake opened the door to see a young delivery guy standing there, looking pale and exhausted. He wore a Domino's uniform, but there was something off about him. His eyes were glassy, and his movements were jerky, almost robotic. "Here's your order," the delivery guy said, holding out the pizza box with shaky hands. Jake noticed the box was unusually heavy and oddly warm, almost too warm to be just a pizza. The delivery guy's voice was barely above a whisper. "Have a good night." Jake thanked him and closed the door. As soon as he set the box down on the table, a faint, sickly sweet smell began to fill the room. He shrugged it off as the smell of the pizza, but then noticed the box started to twitch slightly, like something was alive inside. Curious and more than a little unnerved, Jake carefully lifted the lid. Inside, instead of the usual neatly arranged slices, there was something else entirely, a thick, glistening mass of raw meat that didn't resemble any topping he'd ever seen. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat, and tiny veins seemed to ripple beneath the surface. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have opened it. Jake's heart raced as he stared at the grotesque contents. He slammed the box shut and tried to throw it away, but the pizza box wouldn't budge. It was stuck to the table as if glued by some unseen force. Panicking, Jake called Domino's customer service to report the strange delivery. The voice on the other end was cold, clipped, and emotionless. "We have no record of your order," the agent said flatly. "Please discard the box immediately." Before Jake could respond, the power in his apartment flickered and went out. The room went dark, except for the faint red glow emanating from beneath the box. He felt a cold breath on the back of his neck, and when he spun around, no one was there. The next morning, the police found Jake's apartment empty, the table wiped clean, the pizza box gone without a trace. The only thing left behind was a smear of dark, sticky residue on the floor and a single chilling message scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood. "Some deliveries are never meant to be opened." Jake was never seen again. Word spread in the neighborhood about the Domino's delivery that came with a warning no one dared to ignore. Customers began sharing stories about deliveries arriving late at night, odd smells, and strange disappearances, each linked to that same Domino's location. Whether it was a cursed order or something darker lurking behind the pizza chain's facade, no one wanted to find out. So next time you order Domino's late at night, think twice before opening that box. Because some deliveries come with more than just pizza, and once you open them, you might never close that door again.
Story number 6.
It was a late Friday night when Jake, a college student working part-time at Domino's, was closing up the store alone. The city was unusually quiet, the streets dimly lit and empty. His manager had left hours ago, leaving Jake with the final orders to deliver. Just one last run, a small order to a nearby address on the outskirts of town. Jake grabbed the pizza, stuffed it in the delivery bag, and hopped on his scooter. The GPS led him down a narrow, winding road he'd never taken before. The houses here looked old, some abandoned, the streetlights flickering like they barely worked. Still, Jake figured it was just one more delivery. When he arrived, the house was almost completely dark, a decaying Victorian with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Jake knocked on the door, but no one answered. He called the number on the order, but the line was dead. Confused, he stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath his feet. Suddenly, the door creaked open by itself. Inside, it was pitch black. He could barely make out shapes in the gloom, but there was a strong smell of something rotten mixed with something metallic. Jake's heart pounded. He called out, "Hello? I have your order." No response. The door slammed shut behind him, and the lock clicked. Panic started to rise. Jake fumbled for his phone, but there was no signal. He tried the door. It was stuck. In the darkness, he heard faint whispers, like distant voices carried on a breeze, though the windows were shut tight. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room. What he saw made his blood run cold. The walls were covered in strange symbols drawn in what looked like dried blood. On a small table lay another Domino's pizza box, identical to the one he was holding, but inside were scraps of paper with cryptic messages, warnings written in shaky handwriting. "Do not deliver. They watch. Leave now." Suddenly, a shadow moved just beyond the beam of light. Jake froze. The whispering grew louder, turning into guttural growls. Something heavy breathed nearby, just out of sight. The temperature dropped, his breath fogging in the air. He sprinted to the door, pulling and banging, finally breaking free. He ran back to his scooter, heart hammering. But as he looked back at the house one last time, the front door slammed shut, and a dark figure stood silhouetted in the window, watching him leave. Back at the store, Jake told his manager, who paled and told him this wasn't the first delivery to that house. Several drivers had vanished over the years, last seen heading to that same creepy address. The police had no leads, chalking it up to urban legend. But Jake knew the truth. Some orders aren't meant to be delivered, and some houses don't want visitors, especially those carrying Domino's pizza. From that night on, Jake quit deliveries forever. But sometimes when a Domino's box arrives at his door unbidden, he hears that same chilling whisper.
Story number 7.
I remember the night vividly, still sends a chill down my spine. I was working the late shift at a Domino's in a quiet part of town. It was a slow evening, the kind where you start to notice every little noise echoing through the empty store. Around midnight, a call came through from a customer I'd never heard of before, asking for a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese. The address was in an old neighborhood, a place people usually avoided after dark. I grabbed the pizza and headed out, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. The streetlights were flickering as I pulled up to the house. It was an old Victorian-looking place, with peeling paint and windows covered in grime. I knocked, but no one answered. Then I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I called out, but only silence replied. I left the pizza on the porch, rang the doorbell, and stepped back to my car. Just as I was about to drive away, I saw movement inside. Curiosity, or maybe something darker, made me walk back up to the door and peek inside. The house was freezing cold, even though the summer night was warm. The air smelled like damp wood and something metallic. In the living room, scattered across the floor, were dozens of empty pizza boxes, all from Domino's, all the same kind of pizza I was delivering tonight. It looked like they had been there for weeks. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, just behind me. I spun around but saw nothing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from the customer's number. "Thanks for coming back. Don't forget the tip." My heart started racing. I wanted to leave, but the front door slammed shut on its own, locking me inside. I ran to the back, Tried every door and window, but they were all sealed tight. Suddenly, the lights flickered off, and the room plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight and saw something I still can't explain. A shadowy figure standing in the corner, eyes glowing faintly red. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze burning into me, like it was waiting for something. After what felt like hours, the lights snapped back on. The door to the front porch was wide open. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted out and didn't stop until I was back at the store. I called the police, but when they checked the address, the house was empty, condemned years ago after a fire. No record of any recent deliveries or calls from that number. The pizza I had left on the porch was never found. Since that night, every late shift I work, I get calls from that same number. They never speak, just heavy breathing or faint whispers. And sometimes when the store is empty, I swear I can smell pepperoni and cheese lingering in the air, even when no pizzas have been baked for hours.
Story number 8.
It was a cold Friday night when Jake decided to order a pizza from Domino's after a long, exhausting day. The kind of night where the streets were almost empty and the wind whispered eerie secrets between the streetlights. Jake was alone in his apartment, the only sound the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the old building settling. He placed his order online, a large pepperoni with extra cheese, and expected it to arrive within 30 minutes. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Jake opened the door, and standing there was a delivery driver he didn't recognize. The man was oddly silent, wearing a Domino's uniform, but his face was pale, almost ghostly, with eyes that seemed to stare right through Jake. He handed over the pizza box with trembling hands and quickly walked away without a word. Feeling unsettled but brushing it off, Jake closed the door and opened the box. Inside, instead of the usual cheesy, aromatic pizza, there was only a single slice, burnt and blackened, with strange symbols carved into the crust. Confused, Jake reached for his phone to call Domino's, but the screen flickered and went black. Suddenly, the lights in his apartment went out. Complete darkness swallowed the room. Jake fumbled for a flashlight, but found only his phone, still dead. He heard faint footsteps echoing in the hallway outside his door. His heart pounded as he tried to steady his breath. Then came a whisper, soft, chilling, barely audible. "Eat it," it hissed. Jake backed away from the door, but the whisper turned into a growl. The burnt slice seemed to emit a faint glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. In a panic, Jake threw the slice onto the floor, but as it hit the ground, the burnt pizza began to twitch like some grotesque living thing. The symbols on it started to glow brighter, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Jake fled to his bedroom, slammed the door shut, and barricaded it with a chair. He could hear scratching on the other side, like nails digging into wood. The growling grew louder, merging with low moans, as if the very walls were alive with something malevolent. Hours passed like this until finally the scratching stopped. The power flickered back on. Jake, trembling, opened the door cautiously. The burnt pizza slice was gone. So was the strange driver. The next day, when Jake called Domino's to report the incident, the manager told him no drivers had been sent out from their branch that night. The delivery system showed no record of his order. Jake never ordered from Domino's again. But sometimes, late at night, he swears he can hear the faint growl of something hungry waiting just outside his door. A hunger born from that cursed, burnt slice.
Story number 9.
It was a Friday night when Mark decided to order a Domino's pizza after a long week at work. He was tired, hungry, and craving something simple. He called in his order, a large pepperoni with extra cheese, and chose the usual delivery option. The Domino's near his apartment was just a few blocks away, so he expected the pizza to arrive quickly. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Mark opened the door to find a delivery guy standing there, holding a large, steaming pizza box. The man was wearing the standard Domino's uniform, but something felt off. His eyes were dull and didn't meet Mark's gaze. The delivery guy handed over the pizza without a word, then turned and left quickly. Mark shrugged it off and shut the door. As he opened the box, a strange metallic smell hit him. The pizza looked normal, but there was a faint reddish tint to the cheese, almost like it was stained. He thought maybe it was just the lighting. He took a bite, and immediately felt a sharp metallic taste in his mouth. Mark set the pizza down, feeling queasy. Half an hour later, Mark started to feel dizzy and nauseous. His vision blurred and his hands trembled uncontrollably. He stumbled to the bathroom mirror and looked at his reflection. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and dark veins started to appear around his wrists. Confused and scared, he grabbed his phone to call for help, but it wouldn't turn on. The battery was dead, even though he had charged it fully earlier. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room, and Mark heard faint scratching sounds coming from the floor below, his basement. He lived alone and never used the basement, which was always locked. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. Against his better judgment, Mark grabbed a flashlight and headed downstairs. The basement door was slightly ajar, and a sick feeling washed over him as he pushed it open. The light flickered as he scanned the room. The source of the scratching was a small trapdoor in the floor, one he had never noticed before. The scratching was now accompanied by muffled, desperate whispers pleading for help. Mark's heart pounded as he forced the trapdoor open. Inside was a narrow tunnel, crawling with shadows. He leaned in, and the whispers became clear, voices repeating, "Help me! Trapped! Dominoes!" His flashlight flickered again, then died. In the darkness, Mark felt icy fingers brush his neck. Panicked, he scrambled back upstairs, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. But the voices didn't stop. They echoed through his apartment, soft at first, then growing louder. He tried calling Domino's to report the delivery, but the line was dead. The next day, Mark learned something chilling. The Domino's store near his apartment had been closed for renovations for over a month. There was no way anyone had delivered pizza that night. Terrified, Mark never ordered from Domino's again. But sometimes, late at night, he still hears the scratching and whispers beneath his floorboards, reminders that some deliveries come with a price far worse than hunger.
Story number 10.
One summer night, a delivery driver named Mark was working a late shift for Domino's in a small town where everyone knew each other. It was past midnight, and the streets were quiet, except for the occasional hum of a car or distant bark of a dog. Mark had already finished several deliveries, most to familiar addresses, but then his manager handed him an order for a house on the outskirts of town, one he'd never been to before. The address was on a narrow, unlit road that seemed to vanish into thick woods. When Mark pulled up to the house, he noticed the porch light flickering erratically, casting long shadows. He rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He called the customer's number listed on the receipt, but it went straight to voicemail. Feeling uneasy, Mark decided to knock on the door. Suddenly, it creaked open just a crack. A faint, raspy voice whispered, "Thank you. Come in." Mark hesitated, but stepped inside, the door shutting softly behind him. The air was cold and smelled of mildew and something metallic. The house was dark except for a dim light coming from the kitchen. Mark called out to announce the delivery, but no one responded. As he placed the pizza on the table, he noticed something strange, a set of old photos scattered on the floor. They were of children, all smiling, but each photo had a red X marked over the faces. A chill ran down Mark's spine. Suddenly, he heard footsteps upstairs. He looked around, heart pounding, but the stairs were steep and creaky, and he wasn't sure he wanted to find out who was up there. He started backing toward the door, but stopped abruptly when he heard a whisper. So close it felt like it was right behind his ear. "Don't leave. We're hungry." Panic surged through him. Mark dashed for the door, but the handle was frozen cold in his grip, and the door wouldn't budge. The flickering porch light outside died, plunging the house into near total darkness. Frantically, Mark pulled out his phone to use the flashlight, and in the beam, he caught a glimpse of shadows moving just beyond the kitchen doorway, too many to count, like figures pressing in on him from the darkness. He slammed his phone against the wall, and the light died. The whispers turned into low, guttural growls. With a desperate heave, Mark kicked the door open and ran into the night, the sounds of something chasing him echoing behind. He didn't stop until he reached the main road, gasping and shaking. When the police arrived, the house was empty, except for the photos on the floor, and one more, freshly added. It was a picture of Mark with a red X painted across his face. No one ever saw him deliver to that house again. But every so often at night, Drivers report strange calls from the same number with no one on the other end except faint, hungry whispers. And some say that if you deliver to that house, you never come back.
Story number 11.
There was a Domino's pizza delivery driver named Mark who worked the late-night shifts in a quiet suburban town. On one rainy Friday evening just before midnight, he got a call for a delivery at a secluded house on the outskirts of town. The address was unfamiliar, but it wasn't unusual to get new routes. The order was large, several pizzas, wings, and drinks, paid for in advance with a credit card. The customer's name was vague, just Mr. Smith. Mark drove carefully through the rain-slick streets, his headlights cutting through the mist as he followed the GPS directions to a narrow, winding lane lined with dense trees. The road seemed to grow darker and more isolated the farther he went, and the house at the end was barely visible through the heavy fog. It was an old, two-story farmhouse with peeling paint and boarded-up windows, looking abandoned and long forgotten. He hesitated for a moment, uneasy, but the order was prepaid, and he needed to finish his shift. He grabbed the pizza bag and walked up the cracked porch steps, noticing how cold the air suddenly felt, even through his jacket. When he knocked on the door, there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. Trying the handle, he found the door unlocked. His heart raced as he called out, "Hello? Pizza delivery." But the house was silent except for the sound of rain tapping on the roof. Mark stepped inside cautiously, the smell of damp wood and dust filling his nostrils. He called out again, but no one answered. The dim light from his phone barely illuminated the entryway, where old furniture was covered in sheets and a layer of grime coated the floor. Then, from upstairs, he heard the faint sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, but oddly distant. He decided to leave the pizzas on the table near the door and head back outside, but as he turned, he saw something chilling, a message scrawled on the wall in what looked like smeared red paint or blood. "Don't leave." Fear gripped him, and Mark hurried down the steps, but as he reached the porch, the door slammed shut behind him. He tried the handle. It was locked tight. His phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "Thank you for delivering. You're not leaving tonight." Panicking, Mark tried to open windows, shout for help, but the house seemed to trap him in. Suddenly, the lights flickered on upstairs, revealing a shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs, watching him. The figure didn't move, but just stared with hollow eyes. Mark's breathing grew rapid as he backed away, but the figure began descending the stairs slowly, each step echoing ominously. In a desperate scramble, Mark found an old cellar door and pried it open, hoping to escape through the basement. Inside, it was pitch black, cold, and smelled of mold. He fumbled for his phone's flashlight and made his way down the creaking steps. As he reached the bottom, the door slammed shut above him. In the darkness, he heard whispering voices all around, faint but urgent. His flashlight flickered, and in that brief light, he saw dozens of old pizza boxes stacked against the wall, each one marked with dates spanning years, all with the same ominous message painted in red: delivered but never left. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the damp walls. "Stay with us." Mark's light died completely, plunging him into darkness. The last thing he felt was cold hands gripping his arms, pulling him deeper into the basement. The next morning, the Domino store got a call asking about the driver's whereabouts. Mark was never seen again. The house at the end of that lane remained empty, except for the faint glow of a pizza delivery bag left on the porch. And every week, neighbors reported hearing quiet knocking at their doors late at night, with no one there when they answered.
Story number 12.
Late one night, around 1:30 a.m., Mark got a call to deliver a pizza for Domino's. It was one of those slow shifts where the only thing that breaks the monotony is a random, off-hours order. The address was for a house on the edge of town, a place Mark had never been to before. The GPS showed a dead-end street, surrounded by thick woods, the kind of place where streetlights barely reach and shadows crowd the edges. When Mark pulled up, the house was old, almost forgotten, its paint peeling and the yard overgrown. No porch light, no sign of life. The door creaked open before he even rang the bell, and a thin, pale man stood there with a hollow expression, his eyes dark and empty like he hadn't slept in days. Mark handed over the pizza, and the man took it without a word, closing the door slowly behind him. As Mark turned back to his car, he noticed something odd, a faint tapping sound from the side of the house. He stopped and listened. It was rhythmic, slow, like someone tapping a knife against wood. The sound seemed to be coming from the basement window, a small, grimy pane about eye level from the ground. Curious and a little uneasy, Mark edged closer and peered in. At first, it looked like the basement was empty, just old furniture and boxes. Then in the shadows, he saw a figure, a woman, pale and wide-eyed, her hands pressed against the glass as if trying to escape. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Mark blinked, but the figure didn't disappear. Heart pounding, he stepped back, ready to leave. Suddenly, the basement window slammed shut with a loud bang that echoed through the night. The tapping stopped. When Mark got back into his car and glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw the house's porch light flick on for the first time. But instead of the man who'd answered the door, a second figure stood in the doorway. This one taller, hunched, its face hidden in shadows. Mark floored the accelerator and didn't stop until he was miles away. He never went back to that street. The next day, Mark called the Domino store to ask about the delivery address. The manager paused, then told him that house had been abandoned for years. The family that lived there had vanished without a trace. No one was supposed to be living there. To this day, Mark swears the pizza box was warm in his hands when he delivered it, as if the pizza was freshly baked and steaming. But when the cops finally checked the house weeks later, they found nothing inside but dust and silence. Mark quit delivery that night. But sometimes when he closes his eyes, he still hears that slow tapping coming from a basement window, begging to be let out.
Story number 13.
It happened in 2019, in a quiet suburban area just outside of Pittsburgh. A young guy named Matt was working as a delivery driver for Domino's. He had started the job to make some extra cash during college, and at first, it was nothing out of the ordinary. Long shifts, late nights, rude customers, the usual. But there was one delivery that stuck with him so badly, he quit a week later and never took a delivery job again. It was a rainy Thursday night. Business was slow, and Matt was sitting in the back scrolling through his phone when the order came in. A large pepperoni pizza, cinnamon twists, and a bottle of Coke ordered online. The address was strange, an old house near the edge of a wooded area about 15 minutes out of town. He recognized the street name, but couldn't picture the house. The GPS showed it sitting isolated from the other houses, almost tucked back into the woods. When Matt got there, the place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The porch light was on, but barely. A dim yellow glow that flickered like it was about to burn out. The house looked warped, like the wood was sagging in on itself. Shutters were crooked, some of the windows were boarded up, and the grass was up to his knees even in the middle of summer. He knocked once on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder, calling out, "Domino's!" The door creaked open about an inch from the force of his knock. That's when he noticed there were no cars in the driveway, no lights on inside, nothing to indicate someone actually lived there. His skin prickled, but he was already soaked from the rain and just wanted to get back in the car. A voice came from inside. It was soft but clear. "Come in, just leave it on the table." Matt stepped inside hesitantly. The place smelled awful, stale, like mold and rot. His sneakers stuck to the floor with every step. The living room was completely empty except for an old battered table in the center. He set the pizza box and Coke down, called out again, "Hello?" but got no answer. That's when he noticed something strange. There were no personal items, no TV, no photos on the walls, no furniture other than that table. The walls were discolored, water-stained, and in some places, the drywall had caved in. As he turned to leave, he glanced at the table and noticed a small envelope tucked under the pizza box. Curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed it, thinking maybe it was a tip. He opened it as he got back into the car. Inside was a torn, grimy photograph and a note. The photo showed a family, parents with 2 kids, standing in front of that same house, but it looked decades old. Everyone in the picture looked wrong. Their eyes were scratched out, and the mother's head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it had been broken. The note was in messy, almost childlike handwriting. It read, "You fed them. Now they'll feed on you." Matt felt his chest tighten. He looked back at the house, and that's when he saw movement. Someone or something was standing in the upstairs window. The outline was tall, too tall to be human. Long arms stretched down to its knees, its head cocked to the side in a broken, jerking motion. The porch light flickered violently before shutting off completely, and a loud thump echoed from inside the house. Heart pounding, Matt peeled out of the driveway, tires slipping on the wet gravel. He kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced something was following him. But the rain was so heavy he couldn't see more than a few feet behind. By the time he got back to the store, he was pale and shaking. His manager didn't believe a word of it, brushing it off as him trying to get out of finishing his shift. Later that night, Matt checked the GPS history on his phone. The address didn't exist. The location pin just pointed to a patch of woods, no roads, no buildings, nothing. He drove back during the day to see if he had made a mistake, but there was no house, no driveway, just dense trees and overgrown brush like no one had ever lived there. The order had come through the Domino system, payment processed, everything logged like a normal delivery. But when Matt asked the store owner to look up the phone number tied to the order, it came back disconnected. Worse, the store manager quietly admitted that other drivers had gotten weird calls from that area before, but no one ever mentioned it because they didn't want to scare the new hires. Matt quit shortly after. A few months later, the Domino store quietly closed, citing staffing issues, but everyone around town knew it was because no one wanted to do deliveries to the outer woods. People said the area used to be an old settlement, wiped out by a fire in the 70s, the remains buried by nature. No one could explain how the orders kept coming in or why the app let them through. But everyone who worked there agreed on one thing. If you ever get an order to a house you don't recognize, especially one near the woods, just cancel it.